totally involved the civilian population.
Oh, I mean,
That's who were the fighters. But they would burn villages and stuff.
Yeah. They'd go out of their way to do that
I'm just saying, there was
stuff.
this brief period where people turned into gentlemen. And they were like, war is a gentlemanly operation, and we will march. I mean, to march like in these lines, in red uniforms, is so counterintuitive to survival, is it not?
Well,
And the guy would get shot next to you, and you would just keep going. Like,
to be fair to the military strategists of the time, the reason that they were walking in straight lines is because the accuracy of the rifles they were using, because they're using musket balls, is very, very bad. So if you line everybody up in a straight line, then the basic idea is you've created a massive field of fire. Whereas if you don't line them up in a straight line, it's very difficult to snipe.
No matter how bad the guns were, you don't think it would be probably better for your own survival to like crawl or scatter, not be all like lined up together, hide behind trees, maybe?
Just in the name of military history, to be fair to the British Empire, they did kick the shit out of everybody for about 200 years using these sorts of tactics. And then the tactics changed. But the integration of the civilian population, the general point you're making, which is that war is brutal and it is hell. And it has never not been brutal and never not been hell. And it turns out the way you stop war is by winning it. It's only in the last, half century that the West has decided that the way you stop war is by jabbering about it. Like this is that's not the way you actually stop war. I mean, there's a great book called The Causes of War by Jeffrey Blaine, where he actually analyzes every war between 1700 and 1988. And what he finds is peace is an outgrowth of one side giving up. It turns out that peace is an outgrowth of one side kicking the shit out of the other side so hard that they decide not to do war anymore. And so, everybody in the West for a century has been trying to figure out, what was it about the Versailles Treaty? Was it too onerous? Was it not onerous enough? And the answer that Jeffrey Blaine gives, he says, well, you know what I noticed? Germany was still standing after World War I, and then they weren't after World War II. After World War II, Germany gets completely divvied up. They get demilitarized, they get owned by the Americans and by the Russians. They split the entire country. Yep. And guess what? Ain't no more wars from Germany. Because it turns out that when you kick the shit out of somebody really, really, really hard, they don't want to do war anymore. Right. And so every time you have these sort of premature, what if we did a ceasefire? What if we what if we just calm down? War is a process of exhausting one side or the other. And if people remain unexhausted, 5 minutes from now, they're back at it, as it turns out. And so it turns out the best thing the West can do is fight, if they're hit, anybody in the West, the United States, anybody, fight a brutal, vicious war in as short a fashion as possible, trying to preserve as many civilian lives as you can, and win. And then you get peace. And if you don't win, you don't get peace.
Yeah, that's true. It's the way of the world. But I will contest you on this one thing. You said the British kicked ass for a couple of 100 years using those tactics. Well, you know whose ass they didn't kick? Mr. George Washington.
That's true.
All right, comrade.
America.
Comrade. And you know that Washington only fought 9 battles and he only won 3. Did you know that?
I did know that, actually. Because, but again, I don't wish to be like the British apologist here. There's a case to be made the British kind of gave up. And the British basically said, this is not worth the cost.
Gave up. Well, because they tried every which way to defeat us. First, they came down from Canada. Then they went in the middle states. That's like Delaware and all those battles. And then they went through the South. They tried every which way, and then they lost.
They did.
No, of course, it also hinged on the fact that we got the French fleet, which was on vacay because I think they were just in Haiti or something. They were probably doing something heinous and colonizing. I'm sure they were, because all people were bad back then, including people of color in other parts of the world. All humans are the same, basically. To not think that is actually what is racist. Okay, but they were doing something horrible, I'm sure, in our hemisphere. But then they had it was like a timeshare. They had an opening. And they were somehow, and we texted them and said, could you bottle up the British with your fleet as long as they're not working? I mean, we'll make it worth your while.
And listen, the other point you can make is that the Brits in the Revolutionary War were basically fighting other Brits, meaning that the Americans were a British offshoot. I mean, they were. Everybody's grandfather had been from Britain.
Yeah.
So, it was British people kind of fighting other British people.
What's amazing that probably maybe people don't realize is that 10 years before we declared independence, nobody was thinking about it in America. They were proudly British colonists.
100%.
But 1765, you get the Stamp Act. And that's the beginning of, taxation without representation, and we're paying for, because Britain was fighting a war with the French overseas,
Right. Well,
which was the French and Indian War here in America.
Right.
But it was a global war, and it cost a lot of money, and they were asking us to chip in. And this is what is the breaking point for a lot of people. People like money.
It's true. And people also, the Brits recognized that because the population of the United States was growing so fast and the United States territory was so vast and lucrative, that eventually, if they allowed proper representation in Parliament, eventually America would run Britain. That was one of their major concerns, is that in Parliament, as the population of the United States grew, that Britain would eventually, it would be a reverse colony of America as opposed to the other way around. And America was like, well, yeah, I mean, that's true. So what's the problem? And so you see, obviously, decolonization from Britain among former British citizens in Australia, you see it in the United States, you see it in Canada, you see it in a wide variety of places around the globe. But yeah, I mean, listen, the British Empire was the greatest empire of its day for 2 centuries through freedom of the seas. Now we're the greatest empire of our day through freedom of the seas. And this is one of the quarrels I have with some of my compatriots on the right who are more isolationist about foreign policy. And that is, if all people everywhere are kind of the same.
Hey everyone, I'm on Substack now. Check it out and subscribe now at billmaher.substack.com. What could be simpler than that? My name, then dot, substack.com.